No gentleman will take her card. Not this season, nor the next, nor if she sits beneath that pillar until the candles burn down to their sockets. The whisper came from behind a fan painted with shepherdesses, pitched at exactly the volume that pretends to be private and intends to be heard. Miss Honoria Fell, 24 years old and 3 seasons on the shelf, sat where she always sat on a Wednesday night at Almack's, on the bench nearest the third pillar, with her dance card lying open in her lap and not one name written upon it. The rooms were hot. 500 candles will do that, and so will 400 people determined to be seen enjoying themselves. The roses pinned at the waists of the newest debutantes had begun to wilt within the hour, shedding petals that were trodden underfoot and gave up their scent to the floorboards, and a bee that had come in among the flowers was knocking itself against the lowest luster of the chandelier, having mistaken so much glitter for a garden. An hour earlier, waiting on her aunt's steps in Hill Street, Honoria had listened to the wood pigeons calling in the plane trees, that low, unhurried country sound, and had thought that a pigeon's evening promised more than her own. "You are doing the thing with your chin," her aunt murmured. Lady Treadwell was 61, widowed, and constitutionally incapable of pity. "The brave thing. Leave off, my dear. It makes the dowagers feel watched. Would you prefer that I weep, Aunt? I would prefer that you eat. The bread and butter in the supper room is sliced thin enough to read scripture through. But it is food, and you had none at home. I could not swallow at home." Honoria turned her card over so that its empty lines faced her own knee rather than the room. "I find I cannot swallow here either, so the economy is perfect." The little pencil hung beside the card on its silk cord. It was a stub now, no longer than her thumbnail, sharpened and sharpened again across 3 seasons in which nobody had once asked to use it. She kept it the same as another woman might keep a relic. It had been a whole pencil once. So, she sometimes thought, had she? There was one thing in the room that not even her aunt knew of. In Honoria's reticule, folded to the size of a wafer and stitched beneath the lining where no idle hand would find it, lay a letter addressed to a Mrs. Quarm of Harrogate, accepting the position of paid companion at £40 a year. She had written it on Monday, in a fair hand that had not trembled until the signature. She had only to post it, and the season would be over. The benches, the shepherdess fans, the pity worn like perfume, all of it finished. Tomorrow, she told herself, watching the quadrille form without her. Tomorrow she would post it, and tonight the Tun might have its last look at the girl whose dowry was gambled away. That was the story, at any rate. Everybody in these rooms could recite it. When her father died, 3 years passed. His affairs were found to be short by the exact sum of her portion, £10,000, withdrawn from the funds with nothing to show for it, and a clerk in his solicitor's chambers had been overheard to say that it was a gentleman's debt, paid like a gentleman, and best not spoken of. The Tun required nothing further. By Michaelmas the whisper had grown teeth. Fell gambled the girl's portion, my dear, gambled it, and died of the shame, and now the daughter sits at Almack's with a face like a Sunday, and nothing behind it but 40 acres of mortgaged turnips. She had never once contradicted them. To defend her father she would have needed the truth, and he had died without giving it to her. Miss Fell. Her aunt's fan had stopped. There is a man looking at you. There are 200 men in this room, Aunt, and not one of them has looked at me since the Regent grew thin. This one crossed the floor while you were being witty at your shoe. Compose yourself. He had come in scarcely 3 minutes before 11, when the doors of Almack's are barred against latecomers though a king should knock, and he had come in plain. A black coat without a single fob or seal, a waistcoat the color of ash, a cravat tied for cleanliness rather than glory, knee breeches correct to the letter of the patroness's law, and not 1 inch beyond it. He was tall, dark-haired, perhaps 33, and he moved through that glittering crush without deference and without hurry, and the crush, not knowing why, gave way for him. He stopped in front of her bench and bowed. "Madam," he said, "may I have your card?" Honoria did not move. On the benches to her left, 3 fans went still at once, which is the Almack's equivalent of a shout. "You are mistaken, sir. You will want one of the ladies by the fire. I am seldom mistaken about what I want. Your card, if you will lend it to me." "We have not been introduced," she said, "and you are asking to borrow the one object in this room I can claim entire ownership of. Then I am asking a great deal." He did not smile quite. "Vane, that is my name, for the purpose of introductions. If you require somebody grander to say it for me, Lady Jersey is bearing down upon us at this moment, and she has known my family 30 years. And what does your family do, Mr. Vane?" "It waits," he said, "for me to do something sensible. May I?" Afterward, Honoria was never able to explain, even to her aunt, why she held the card out to him. She only knew that his eyes had gone once, briefly, to the little pencil stub on its cord, and that he had looked at that worn-down inch of cedar, the same as other men look at a locked gate, and something in her had preferred ruin to another hour of the bench. He took the card. He took the stub. He set his heel against the floor, braced the card upon his palm, and began, without haste, to write. "Sir," she said, "the first 2 lines are ample." He kept writing. "Mr. Vane, there are 10 dances remaining on that card. I can count, Miss Fell. You have written on every line. I have." He turned the card about and showed it to her. 10 lines, 1 name, the letters small and even, and quite unashamed. I saw nothing there worth leaving to chance. The fans were no longer still. The whisper ran down the benches faster than a spark down a powder line, out past the pillars to the card room and the patroness's dice, and it changed as it ran, from "Who is he?" to "He has taken the Fell girl's card," to at last, in the voice of a dowager who had never in her life been early to anything, "He has signed the whole of it, every line," as though the girl were an heiress and he a boy of 20. Lady Jersey arrived like weather. "Mr. Vane," she said the name as a magistrate reads a charge sheet. "You have been in my rooms 1/4 of an hour. 11 minutes, my lady. And in 11 minutes you have contrived to engage 1 lady for an entire evening. Which is not done, sir. Not here. Not by anybody. Not by a royal duke on his birthday. 2 dances is the outside of what this room forgives. I will trouble you to give the card back its dignity. The card has its dignity, my lady." He handed it, instead, to Honoria. "It is the room that has been careless of its own." Lady Jersey's mouth opened, and then, to the astonishment of every soul within 20 feet, closed. She looked at him a long moment. At the plain coat, at the ash-gray waistcoat, and whatever she found in his face made her draw breath through her nose, like a woman counting silently to 10. "You know what you are doing, I suppose," she said, "too low for the benches." "I have waited 7 years to do it," he said, "just as low." "You will pardon me, my lady. The set is forming, and the lady is engaged." Thoroughly, he offered Honoria his hand. Behind her, quite distinctly, her aunt said, "Well," in the tone of a woman revising her will, and then Honoria was on the floor of Almack's for the first time in 3 seasons, and 400 people had stopped pretending not to look. The first dance was a quadrille, which is to say it was mostly waiting, and waiting is conversation's oldest friend. "You dance well for a man of no particular family, Mr. Vane. I had a dancing master of no particular mercy. You hold your head as though the room were a court-martial, Miss Fell. Whom are they trying?" "Me, sir. They have been trying me for 3 years. The verdict came in long ago, but the sentence appears to be perpetual attendance. And what was the charge? Poverty, she said, aggravated by a good memory. He was silent while the figure took her from him and gave her back. Then, mine was absence, he said, aggravated by the same. We are a matched pair of felons. Where were you absent from? England. 7 years, less a few months. Vienna, then Italy, then a long while in the mountains between, where nobody dances and the post arrives when God remembers it. And what brought you back? A voice, he said, and the figure parted them, and when it restored her to his side, he had begun speaking of something else entirely, as though the word had been a door he had opened by mistake and quietly closed again. She noticed everything about him that the room noticed, the plainness, the assurance, the patroness's strange forbearance, and one thing more that the room could not see. When he took her gloved hand for the turn, he held it the same as a man holds something he has carried a great distance and does not intend to set down. Between the second dance and the third, the arithmetic of Almack's asserted itself. 2 dances with one partner was gallantry. A third was a declaration, and both of them knew it, and the benches knew it best of all, and had gone quiet in the manner of a courtroom before the foreman stands. Do you understand what a third dance means in this room, Mr. Vane? I understood it before I signed. Then understand this also. She kept her voice pleasant and her spine straight, for the fans were reading her shoulders. 3 years ago I was a joke with a fortune attached, and when the fortune was found to be imaginary, I became a joke entire. If this evening is a wager got up in some club, tell me now. I have survived their laughter. I do not think I could survive being its instrument. He did not answer at once, and she liked him the better for it. Miss Fell, I have never in my life laid money on anything I could not afford to lose. He looked at her, dark eyes level, unhurried. There is no wager. There is a reason, and it is 7 years old, and I will tell it to you, but not on a public floor with a bee dying in the chandelier above us. Will you dance the third with me, on credit? On credit, she said slowly, like a gentleman's debt. No, he said, like a promise. I keep those. She gave him the third dance. It was a waltz, and Lady Jersey, sailing past with the expression of a woman washing her hands of nations, said only, Miss Fell has my sanction, since the alternative appears to be scandal by other means, and Honoria, who had never once waltzed at Almack's because no man had asked, discovered that being turned about a room by Mr. Vane was very like what she had imagined dancing to be at 17, before she had learned what rooms were for. At supper he fetched her lemonade and the famous bread and butter, and her aunt, ruthlessly, joined them. Mr. Vane, Lady Treadwell settled beside him with the deliberation of a frigate coming alongside. My niece tells me you have engaged her for the evening entire. I am her nearest relation, so you will forgive the artillery. Who are you? A man returned from abroad, ma'am, with an unfashionable coat and an intention. Intentions are cheap in April. Fortunes are dearer. Have you one? Aunt Honoria said. It is a fair question, he said, and the answer is yes. I have enough, and then somewhat more than enough, and none of it at the card tables. I would sooner tell you all of it than have you wonder. But I ask your patience for a fortnight. There is a thing I must do in the proper order, and I have been 7 years arranging the order. The old lady studied him over her lemonade as a jeweler studies a stone brought in wrapped in sacking. You speak like a man who expects to be believed. I speak like a man who has stopped expecting anything else to matter, ma'am. It was at supper, too, that Sir Neville Grange found him. Sir Neville was 40, well-fed, and wore his self-regard as other men wear a watch chain, in plain sight and polished daily. 3 years ago he had driven Honoria in the park 4 times, sat in her aunt's drawing room 11 Tuesdays running, and then, in the week the whisper began, remembered an estate in Shropshire that required him urgently and indefinitely. He drew Mr. Vane aside by the supper-room door, with the confidential air of one Freemason warning another about the soup. "A word, Vane, between men. The lady is charming, nobody denies the face, but you are new to town, so you will thank me. There is nothing behind it. The portion is gone, the father saw to that before he died. £10,000 into the pockets of God knows what company. A man who dances twice may be forgiven. A man who signs a whole card has bought the horse, sir, and this one is lame." "You examined the lady's accounts, then," Mr. Vane said. "Every man in town examined them, in a manner of speaking." "Before or after you examined her character?" Sir Neville blinked. "I do not follow." "No," Mr. Vane agreed. "You would not." "I have made the inspection in the other order, Sir Neville, and I find the deficiency is not on the lady's side. You will excuse me. The horse dances better than the room deserves." Honoria, standing nearer the door than either man had marked, heard the last of it with her gloves gripped white in one hand, and did not know whether the heat in her face was shame or something that had not visited her in 3 years, and had lost its name in the interval. He danced every remaining line of the card. At the last of it, when the fiddles were putting themselves away, and her aunt had gone for the cloaks, he looked down at the card where it hung once more at her wrist, 10 lines bearing one name, and at the stub of pencil beside it. "You have worn this pencil to nothing," he said quietly. 3 seasons will sharpen anything to nothing, Mr. Vane. Even me. Not to nothing." He said it without gallantry, flatly, a man correcting an error of fact. "May I call in Hill Street tomorrow?" "My aunt receives on Thursdays." "That is not what I asked." "Yes," Honoria said, before wisdom could reach her. "You may call." In the carriage, her aunt was silent for the length of 2 streets, which had no precedent. Then she said, "Either that man is mad, or he is very much richer than his coat, or both. And in my long experience of both conditions, Honoria, they are frequently found in the same person. He asked to call tomorrow." "Of course he did. He signed for the whole card." Her aunt looked out at the gas lamps going by. "Whatever he is, child, he did the one thing in the world the ton cannot forgive and cannot resist. He was not ashamed of you. I could kiss him for it, and I have not kissed anything since the late king was sane." That night, in her narrow room, Honoria unhooked the dance card and set it on the table by her bed, where the candle could reach it. 10 lines, a single name repeated, small and even. She did not unpick the letter from her reticule, but she did not post it in the morning either. And Mrs. Quorm of Harrogate, all unknowing, waited another day for her companion. He called the next afternoon, and the afternoon after, and by the following Tuesday, the knocker of the little house in Hill Street had done more work in 6 days than in the 3 years before them. He came on foot. He brought no hothouse tribute, only, on the second day, a twist of brown paper which proved to hold a plain cedar pencil, new and whole and quite unremarkable. "For the next card," he said, "so that the old soldier may be retired with honor. Do not throw the stub away. I have a use for it." "What use can there possibly be for an inch of wood, Mr. Vane?" "An inch of wood," he said, "has done more in this world than most parliaments. Keep it. I will tell you the use when I tell you the reason, and I am still owed a fortnight." They talked, those afternoons, under the chaperonage of Lady Treadwell and her embroidery, which advanced not 1 stitch in 6 days. They talked of Italy and of turnips, of her father's library, sold at auction to the last atlas, and of what a woman reads when the books are gone and the subscription is beyond her means. He asked questions as other men gave compliments, steadily, and with an attention that made the little drawing-room, with its darned cushions and its smell of beeswax and its one good window, seem a larger place than any ballroom she had stood at the edge of. Meanwhile, the town did what the town does. The 7th Wednesday of the season had produced a mystery, and the mystery would not keep. Who was Vane? Nobody was vain. "A Yorkshire coal fortune," said one club. "A company nabob," said another, "come home yellow and cunning to buy a gentlewoman cheap." "A gamester," said a third, sniffing after the last of the fell silver, and at that even the club laughed, for everybody knew there was no silver left to sniff. The patronesses, who could have ended every speculation with a syllable, said nothing at all, and their silence was the loudest thing in London. Invitations did not come to Hill Street. Stares came instead, on the pavement, in the park, at the circulating library, and Honoria bore them the same as she had borne everything for 3 years, upright, pleasant, and with her chin doing the brave thing her aunt had forbidden. On the 6th day, Sir Neville Grange called at Hill Street, his first appearance there in 3 years, and was received, because Lady Treadwell held that a fool turned from the door learns nothing, and a fool admitted may at least be studied. Miss Fell. He arranged his coat-tails and his features into the same expression of kindly office. "I shall be plain with you, as an old friend. This Vane, nobody knows him. He has no club, no people, no acres anybody can name. A woman in your position, forgive me, in your particular position, cannot afford another misfortune. I speak as one who has always wished you well." "You wished me well from Shropshire, sir," Honoria said. "For 3 years. It must have been a great labor, wishing at such a distance." "That was, the estate required. A man of affairs cannot always choose his season." "No," she agreed, "and a woman on a bench cannot always choose her company. But I have been given the choice this once, Sir Neville, and I find I would rather be ruined by a man who looks at my face than rescued by one who audits it. You subtracted £10,000 from my worth 3 years ago. You cannot be astonished now that the remainder declines to entertain you." Sir Neville departed shortly thereafter, and Lady Treadwell, threading her needle with the first stitch of the week, remarked to the window that the drawing-room felt considerably larger. On the 8th day, walking with her aunt's maid, at the unfashionable hour, Honoria carried the letter to Harrogate as far as the receiving office in Mount Street. She stood before the window with the 6pence for the post in her glove, and the clerk looked up, and behind her in the plane trees, a wood pigeon began its low 5-note patience, over and over, the sound of every summer of her childhood, and she thought of a man saying, "I saw nothing there worth leaving to chance." She put the 6pence back in her glove. Outside, to the maid's mystification, she laughed aloud, once, at nothing that could be seen from the pavement. That evening she prayed, as she prayed every evening, kneeling on the cold boards, because the habit was her mother's and the knees were the last thing anybody could take. She had asked God for nothing, these 3 years, having formed the opinion that begging was for creditors. She did not beg now. "Thank you," she said into her folded hands, "for one kind evening and for 6 afternoons. If that is my portion, it is a good one, and I will not say otherwise." Below stairs a door closed. The pigeons had gone quiet, somewhere across the town, though she did not know it. A man stood in a shuttered house in Grosvenor Square before a portrait of his dead brother, and rehearsed, for the 100th time, the order in which a thing 7 years old must be done. For there was one circumstance regarding Mr. Vane that London, in all its guessing, had not so much as brushed against. And it was this: he had told the truth at Almack's. Vane was his name, his family's name, his to give. And he had given it plainly. What he had not given was the rest, and the rest was waiting for him in a lawyer's box and a herald's book and a shuttered house, waiting with the patience of stone, as it had waited for 5 years, since the night a courier had ridden into a mountain village with black-edged letters and found the second son of the house eating bread and cheese above a stable, and had knelt to him. The second Wednesday came. The vouchers held. Lady Treadwell wore her garnets, which came out of their box for weddings, christenings, and victories over Bonaparte, and when Honoria raised an eyebrow at them, her aunt said only, "I dress for the weather, child, and there is weather coming." King Street was all torches and carriage lamps and horses steaming in the April night. Within, the rooms were hotter than before. The roses on the debutantes wilted faster, and the benches had the fat, satisfied look of an audience that is paid for the second act of a play. Honoria wore her gray silk, 3 seasons old, turned once, and knew to a nicety what the fans were saying, that the mysterious nobody would not come twice, that the fell girl had been made a fool of in a new and more interesting fashion, that 10 signed lines were a jest that grew funnier by the day. At 11 lacking a quarter, he had not come. "He will come," her aunt said, watching the doors. "You cannot know that, aunt. I am 1 in 60, Honoria. I know a man in the middle of doing something from a man deciding whether to do it. That one decided years ago. What he is deciding tonight is the manner of it." He came in at 10 minutes before the hour, plain black coat, ash waistcoat, and the room turned to him the same as a field of wheat turns when the wind changes. He crossed to her bench, he bowed, he asked for her card, and this time she gave it without a word, and this time he had a pencil of his own. But he had written only 1 line of it when the doors admitted a final knot of arrivals, an attach from the Austrian embassy, among them a narrow, beaming man in decorations who took 2 steps into the rooms, caught sight of the plain black coat, and stopped as though he had walked into glass. "It cannot be," the attach said, quite loudly, and then, in a voice that carried to the musicians' gallery, "Ashmere, Your Grace. But we mourned you in Vienna. We heard you were gone into the mountains for good and all. Your Grace, Your Grace, what joy, and in such a coat. Silence is supposed to be an absence. What fell upon the assembly rooms at that moment was a presence, a thing with weight, and in the middle of it stood Miss Honoria Fell, with her dance card held out between herself and the man who had signed 1 line of it, watching his face confirm every syllable. "Your Grace," she said. The 2 words came out of her level and cold, and they were the loudest thing in that enormous hush. "I believe you have mistaken your name, sir. You gave me another one." "I gave you my own," he said quietly. "Honoria, Miss Fell," she corrected him, and made her curtsy exact to the last degree of what was owed a duke. No more, no less, and walked the length of Almack's with 400 people watching, past the patroness's dais, where Lady Jersey stood with her eyes shut like a woman listening to an anthem, and out into King Street bareheaded, with her aunt's garnets hurrying behind. He overtook them at the carriage. He did not touch her arm. He stood in the torchlight, and the link boys stared, and he said, "You are owed the reason. You have been owed it 7 years. Let me pay it tonight." "I am owed nothing, Your Grace. That is the whole trouble with me. Ask anybody within." Her voice did not rise. "You watched this room laugh at me for a fortnight, and you let me call you plain mister, and I defended you. To my aunt, to Sir Neville, to my own good sense. There is not a fan in that building that is not saying, at this moment, that the Duke of Ashmere has amused himself with the season's most convenient joke. By tomorrow," he said, "there will not be a fan in London that dares." That is precisely what I cannot forgive. Her chin was doing the brave thing, and she let it. "You have not made me respectable, sir. You have made me untouchable, which is lonelier. Good night." "The reason," he said, "is a girl called Patience Croft." Honoria stopped with her foot on the carriage step. Nobody, in 3 seasons of whispering everything else, had ever said that name to her. "Millbrook," she said slowly, not turning. "The assembly at Millbrook. The lady's maid, 7 years ago this September. You were 17. He came no closer. Grant me a quarter of an hour in your aunt's drawing room, Miss Fell, and I will give you the reason entire, and then, if you wish it, I will take my leave and trouble you no further. But you will hear it seated, and warm, and not on a public pavement with half the ton pressed against the glass behind us. They have had enough of you standing alone in the cold. So have I. Lady Treadwell, from the carriage, said, "Get in, both of you. I have wanted weather all my life, and I am not stopping the storm 2 streets short." The drawing room in Hill Street was cold, until the fire took. He stood by the mantel and did not sit, and Honoria sat very straight on the darned cushions, and her aunt settled into the corner with her embroidery, and became, by an act of will, invisible. 7 years ago, he said, I was a second son. I had been 3 weeks at my friend Colworth's place near Millbrook, because my father was newly buried, and my brother was being made much of, and there was no work in England for the spare once the heir is delivered. A country assembly was got up. I went because Colworth went, and I stood in the doorway the whole evening, because a man who is nobody in particular can do that, and it is restful. You wore green, and your hair was falling out of its pins by 9 o'clock, and you were the only person in that room who was having what could honestly be called a pleasant time. I was 17, Honoria said. I did not yet know what rooms were for. There was a girl by the far wall, a lady's maid, brought to the assembly by her mistress's kindness, or her mistress's carelessness, which wear the same gown. Someone had given her a card, as a courtesy, and no one asked her to dance, and by 10 o'clock a party of young sparks had found the joke in it. One of them took the card off her wrist and held it up and read the empty lines out, one after another, in a voice for the whole room. Vacant, vacant, vacant. The girl stood there in her borrowed muslin with her eyes on the floor, learning the lesson every room in England is built to teach, and the room laughed, because rooms do. He looked into the fire, and then a girl of 17 in green crossed the whole floor with the entire assembly watching, and took the card out of that fool's hand, and took the pencil from her own wrist, a full pencil then, and wrote her name upon every line of it, her own name, 10 times. And she gave it back to the maid, and she said, for the room to hear, "There, now your card is full, and you may sit down by me, for I am engaged to you for the whole of the evening, and I never break an engagement." And when the young men stood gaping at her, she said the sentence I have carried through 2 countries and 5 years of a life I never asked for. She said, a dance card is not a ledger of anybody's worth. It is a promise of company, and I keep my promises. The fire cracked. In the corner, Lady Treadwell's needle had stopped altogether. I did not come to you that night, he went on. I was 26. I had 800 a year and a name nobody needed. What had I to offer? My admiration? You would have curtsied and forgotten me by Tuesday, and you would have been right. Then my brother died, 5 years ago, and everything that had been his came down upon me like a house falling. And I went abroad because grief is quieter where nobody knows your new name, and in Vienna and Rome and every drawing room between, I did what I had been doing since Millbrook, without knowing it. I listened. I stood in doorways, where dukes may also stand, and I listened for a voice that would cross a floor for somebody who could do nothing for her. And I heard every other thing in the world instead. Wit I heard, and kindness that checked first whether it was watched, and virtue keeping its accounts. Never that voice. Then in March I came home to shut up my brother's houses, and at my own club I heard your name, attached, Miss Fell, to a lie about your father, and I heard a man in front of me say, "No gentleman will take her card," and I sat there and thought, no, Very likely no gentleman will. And I went to Lady Jersey, who is my godmother, and asked her for a voucher in the family name, and I put on the plainest coat I own. Because the last time I saw you, I was nobody, and I wish to be looked at once more by somebody whose kindness does not read the Herald's book first. He took from an inner pocket a small worn square of pasteboard and set it gently on the mantel shelf, but he kept his hand over it. You will want to know why the girl, Patience Croft, is the reason, and not only the occasion. That is a thing better shown than told, and it is not mine alone to show. Come to Grosvenor Square, you and your aunt, Thursday, at any hour you name. If, after that, you want no more of me, I will sign nothing of yours again, and the ton may make of me whatever it likes. It generally does. And that card, under your hand, Honoria said. Is that mine also to see on Thursday? It was never mine at all, he said. I have only been its keeper. Thursday, Miss Fell. When he had gone, the little pasteboard square went with him, and the drawing-room was quiet a long while. Well, said Lady Treadwell at last, to her motionless needle. I have worn the garnets twice in vain in my life, Honoria, once at Vauxhall, and once at a christening that miscarried into a quarrel. Not, I think, a third time. By 9 the next morning, London had performed its somersault. The knocker in Hill Street began before breakfast and did not stop. Cards arrived from houses that had cut Honoria on their own doorsteps, invitations to routs and Venetian breakfasts, and a masquerade, 3 of them, in their haste, for dates already past. The same dowager whose whisper had opened the season's 7th Wednesday sent round a basket of forced strawberries with a note declaring that she had always said, always, that dear Miss Fell would be the making of somebody. They are strawberries of the second water, Lady Treadwell pronounced, eating them steadily. Hypocrisy never sends its best fruit. Shall you go to any of these? I shall go to Grosvenor Square on Thursday, Honoria said, and I do not know about a single hour after that. Good, said her aunt. That is the first sensible sentence spoken in this house since April began. Sir Neville Grange called at noon, in a new coat, and got no further than the hall, where the parlour-maid, on instruction, informed him that Miss Fell was not at home, was unlikely to be at home, and had asked her to convey that Shropshire was said to be beautiful at this season. He stood a moment working his jaw, handed across a hopeful posy, and retreated. Lady Treadwell gave the posy to the kitchen girl. The house in Grosvenor Square had its shutters open on Thursday for the first time in 5 years. It was a great pale cliff of a place, and Honoria climbed its steps with her hand on her aunt's arm and her heart going like a bird against a window. The hall within smelled of fresh wax and old stone, and at the foot of the staircase, in the grey stuff gown and white cap of an upper servant, stood a young woman of perhaps 23, with steady brown eyes and her hands folded before her, and Honoria knew her at once, across 7 years, before a word was spoken. Miss Fell, the young woman said, and her curtsy was composed, but her voice had a shake in it. You will not remember me, I think. My name is Croft. Patience Croft. I keep His Grace's house now. 7 years ago last September, at the Millbrook Assembly, you wrote your name 10 times on the card of a lady's maid whom a whole room was laughing at. I remember the room, Honoria said. I remember you, Patience. You wore sprigged muslin, and you had done your mistress's hair that evening far better than your own, and none of it was any fault of yours. Patience Croft's composure went then, all at once, the same as ice goes off a roof in a thaw, and she pressed her folded hands to her mouth for a moment before she could speak. Nobody had ever, she began, and stopped, and began again. I was 16, ma'am. What that room would have made of me, in one evening more, I have thought of often since. My mistress turned me off that same winter without a character, for breaking a comb, and I should have gone the road girls go. ma'am, and we both know its name, only I had one thing to carry through it. I had a card with a lady's name on every line, and a lady's voice in my ear the whole road, saying, "You may sit down by me." When I was hungriest, I did not sell what could not be bought back, because a person whose evenings had been engaged by Miss Honoria Fell of Millbrook was not going to sleep in the kind of house that would ask her to. Do you understand me, ma'am? Your 10 lines fed me better than bread, the whole of one winter. Honoria discovered that she could not immediately answer. His Grace found me in the spring of it. Patience went on, steadier. He had come back to Millbrook to ask after a family in Green, ma'am, if I am honest, and found the family gone away to London, and me scrubbing the assembly room steps for 4pence, and he knew my face from that night in the doorway. He took me into his mother's old house at Ashmere as second still-room maid, and when I proved out, higher, and when the housekeeper died 2 years since, word went out to him abroad, and he wrote back that the keys were to be mine, and when there was talk at my being given them so young, the steward read his letter out. That he had seen my references written 10 times over in a better hand than the king's. But you must not think, ma'am, and here her chin came up in a manner Honoria recognized from her own glass, that I speak from gratitude only. It was I that sent him to Almack's. You sent him, Honoria repeated. In March, ma'am, he came home from abroad and shut himself into the library with the estate books, the same as he shuts himself everywhere, and I brought his coffee, and he said to me, out of a long silence, Croft, I have heard a thing at the club. There is a Miss Fell sits 3 seasons at the assembly rooms, and no gentleman will so much as sign her card. They say her father gamed away her portion. And I set down his coffee, and I said to him, Your Grace, I have kept a certain card 7 years in the bottom of my box, and I will fetch it down now, and you will look at whose name is on it, and then you will put on your coat. And he looked at it a long while, sir, ma'am, forgive me. And then he said, The Tun has had 3 seasons, Croft, and it appears the room is still vacant. And I said, Then sign it, Your Grace, every line, for she would, from above them, on the stair, his voice, and I did. He came down plainly dressed even in his own house, and what was in his face, as he looked at the 2 of them, the housekeeper and the wallflower, standing in the wax-smelling hall with wet eyes, he did not trouble to hide from either. You have had the reason now, he said to Honoria. The whole of it. I did not fall in love with a stranger across a ballroom, Miss Fell. I am not equipped for operas. I heard, once, the rarest thing in England, a person spending her credit where it could purchase nothing, and I have measured every voice in Europe against yours for 7 years, and yours held. A man does not let such a voice sit down on a bench by a pillar, not while he lives. And the card? Honoria asked, because it was that or weep in the hall. Patience Croft drew it from her apron pocket, small, worn soft at the corners, the pasteboard fibbers gone furred along the fold, and held it out. 10 lines. One name 10 times, in a girl's quick hand, the pencil strokes gone silver gray with 7 years. Honoria Fell. Honoria Fell. Honoria Fell. His Grace carried it to Vienna and back, ma'am, Patience said. I lent it to him the once, and made him sign a paper for it. That is a fact, the Duke said gravely, and the paper is in her box, and I do not doubt it is the better secured of my debts. Honoria stood in the great hall, holding the card her own hand had filled at 17, and she began to laugh, and the laugh had tears the whole margin of it, and neither she nor anybody present was able, afterward, to say exactly where the one gave over and the other began. It was that same week, before any notice had been sent to the papers, before anything had been asked or answered, that the last knot of the old lie came undone, and it came undone in Hill Street, on an ordinary wet morning, in the person of a stooped, sunburnt gentleman of 60-odd, who sent up a card reading Colonel Tobias Renfield, and stood in the little drawing room, turning his hat in his hands with the look of a man come to be sentenced. Miss Fell, you will not know me. Your father did. He got it out flat and fast, the manner of a soldier reporting a defeat. I read in the town's chatter that you are noticed at last, and like to be raised high, and I could not let you be raised with a lie still standing on your father's grave, when the truth was mine to give, and I was coward enough to keep it 3 years. Miss Fell, your portion was not gambled. It was given. Given to me, the year your father died, £10,000 in one draft, to cover the ruin my own son had made at the tables, and worse than the tables. Debts of the kind that end in a pistol at dawn. Your father stood my friend 40 years, since we were boys at school. He came to me the night the vowels were called in, and he put the draft into my hand, and he said, Toby, my girl has her face and her sense and her mother's spine, and your boy has a rope around his neck. I know which of them can carry the loss. And he bound me on my honor to silence while my son lived, that the boy might mend unbranded, and I let that silence stand, God forgive me, while the world called my friend a gamester, and his daughter sat down at the margin of every room in London. The old man's voice failed him a moment. My son died at Waterloo, ma'am, doing his duty at the last, which was his father's one comfort. There is no one left for my silence to shield but my own shame. Do with the truth what you will. It should have been yours 3 years ago. The room was very quiet. The rain went on against the one good window. Honoria looked at her hands, and her father looked back out of the whole shape of her life, the sold atlases, the turned gray silk, the pencil sharpened to a stub. And she found that what had come to her, under the grief and over it, was a lightness very near to what the pigeons must feel when the morning lets them off the branch. Colonel Renfield, she said at last, my father chose his silence, and he chose it because he knew it would be kept. I will not spend what he paid for. Tell no one. Ma'am, your own name, my name, has sat out 3 seasons, sir. It is harder wearing than the ton supposes. She rose and gave him her hand. You have told the one person the truth belonged to. That was the whole of your debt. The rest died at Waterloo, honorably. Will you take some tea? You were 40 years my father's friend, and I have 3 years of asking about him saved up, and nobody left who can answer. The colonel stayed 2 hours, and wept twice, and left looking a stone lighter, and Lady Treadwell, closing the door upon him, regarded her niece for a long moment. You will not even clear your own father's name, she said. He cleared it himself, Aunt, the night he wrote that draft. That the world reads the entry wrong is the world's affair. He knew. Now I know, Honoria smiled, and it went all through her. The first entirely unguarded smile of her middle 20s, and one other knows, without being told, for he signed 10 lines against the word of every club in London. That evening she took the little scissors from her workbox at last and unpicked the lining of her reticule and drew out the letter to Mrs. Quarmey, folded to the size of a wafer, carried against her ribs through 2 Wednesdays and a revolution. She read it once through, the fair steady hand, the respectable terms, £40 a year, and Sundays her own, the whole modest architecture of a survivable life. Then she held it to the candle and watched it go up, and she was still watching the black leaf of it curl in the grate when the knocker sounded below, at an hour when no caller in London is respectable. He stood in the firelit drawing-room in his plain coat, rain on his shoulders, and Lady Treadwell, taking one comprehensive look, discovered urgent business with the housekeeper concerning jam. I have come inconveniently, he said on purpose. Convenient hours belong to the ton, and I wanted the last of this to belong to us. Miss Fell, what were you burning as I came up? The maid is scandalized. A life, Honoria said. A small one. It was to have started from Harrogate. I find the coach has been cancelled. Has it? He crossed to the mantel, where the stub of pencil lay in the dish she kept it in. An inch of cedar, sharpened by 3 seasons of nobody. He picked it up and turned it in his fingers, and then he took from his pocket a dance card. New, blank, its little cord neat, its every line empty, and set it on the table between them. I told you I had a use for the old soldier, he said. Here is my suit then, and you may have it plain, for you have had everything else in disguise. I am asking you to marry me. Not to rescue you. You were never drowning. You were treading water in a room that mistook itself for the sea. I am asking because I have heard one voice in my life that made me wish to be a better man within reach of it. And I have crossed Europe twice, on the memory of 10 penciled lines, and I find, Honoria, that I cannot do a third crossing. If it is no, then it is no, and the card stays empty, and I will still stand up with you every Wednesday until they carry one of us out. But if it is yes, I should like it in your hand. You are the only person I have ever known who writes her whole worth on other people's cards. Write something, this once, on your own. Honoria looked at the blank card a long moment. Then she took up the stub, and he watched her. And she wrote, small and even, on the first line, Ashmere. On the second, Ashmere. On the third and the fourth, and down, 9 times. The little stub going soft at the point, and on the 10th line, the last she wrote, in full, Honoria fell. 9 for you, she said, giving it to him, and the last for me. So that you will know I was not swept anywhere, your grace. I walked. I looked at every empty year I had ready and provisioned, and I chose this one, freely, with my eyes open and my own pencil. My father taught me that a gift is a thing you must be strong enough to take as well as give. I am taking. He held the card as men hold their firstborn. Then he bent his head and kissed her hand, above the glove, and then, turning it, the bare inch of wrist beneath, once, with great care, and if the ton could have seen the reclusive Duke of Ashmere at that moment. Standing in a hired-looking coat in the smallest drawing-room in Hill Street, with his eyes shut over a spinster's wrist, every fan in London would have folded for shame. The pencil, too, he said, when he could. You will have pearls, I suppose, and the Ashmere diamonds. My mother would rise from her grave else. But the pencil comes to the marriage, madam. It has done more in this world than most parliaments. There was one Wednesday more before the banns had run their course, and they went to it together, because Honoria said that a woman ought to say goodbye to her bench. The rooms were hot, the roses wilted on schedule, and the whisper ran ahead of them now in its new livery. The Duke, the Duke, the Duke, and his Duchess that will be. It was by the third pillar, fittingly, that the old story made its last stand, in the voice of the same dowager with the shepherdess fan, pitched as ever to Carrie, observing to her neighbor that it was all very affecting, of course, but that the gel came to him without a farthing, gambled away. You know, the father, and a duke might have looked rather higher than the leavings of a card table. The music happened, just then, to be resting. Honoria turned. She did not raise her voice. 3 seasons on the bench had taught her exactly how far a level word travels in a quiet room, and she said, Madam, you have been misinformed, though not by your own fault, for it took me 3 years to learn the truth myself. My father never sat at a card table in his life. What became of my portion was his to command, and is mine to be proud of, and I will tell you what I have told everyone who has asked me honestly, which is no one. He spent it as he spent himself. Quietly, that is all the ton will ever have of that story, and it is more than it has earned. Into the hush that followed, The Duke of Ashmere said, clearly, for the benches, the diet, the musicians' gallery, and the historical record, I have heard it said in this room that no gentleman would take her card. The room was right. I looked at 10 empty lines and found nothing I was willing to leave to chance, and I signed them all, and I would sign 10,000. I did not choose this lady in spite of what she has. I chose her for it. Her fortune took me 7 years to appraise, and it is the only one in England I could not match. Lady Jersey, from the dais, was heard to remark that the assembly rooms had survived Bonaparte and would doubtless survive sincerity, and that his grace would none the less observe, in future, the limit of 2 dances, to which his grace replied that he would observe it faithfully. Being engaged for every line elsewhere for life, they were married 3 weeks after at St. George's, Hanover Square, by special license in the matter of the breakfast, but with the full bands in the matter of the church, because Honoria wanted the old words, said the old slow way. Colonel Renfield gave a toast that he could not finish. In the second pew, in dove-gray silk made new for the occasion, sat the housekeeper of Ashmere, Mrs. Patience Croft, who wept without the smallest attempt at composure, and beside her Lady Treadwell wore the garnets and looked, said several witnesses, positively vindicated. A year on, at Ashmere, the roses did not wilt, having a whole terrace to themselves and no ballroom to die in. Bees worked the lavender borders all the hot afternoon, and in the limes beyond the south window, the wood pigeons kept up their low 5-note patience, over and over, the sound of time being in no hurry. Above the library mantel, in a plain gilt frame that the housekeeper dusted herself and trusted to nobody, hung a dance card, worn soft at the corners, 10 lines full, and below it, on a small velvet mount, an inch of cedar pencil, retired with honor. Visitors asked, sometimes, the Duchess would only smile. It was the aunt, generally, who answered, if she happened to be down from town, 62 now and fiercer than ever. They said once that no gentleman would take her card, Lady Treadwell would say, taking her tea. And they were perfectly correct, which is the epitaph I intend for the whole of the ton. No gentleman took it. A man took it. The one man in England who knew what it was worth, and he has been paying the balance in full every day since. And there. She would point with the teaspoon at the 10th line, at the small even letters gone a year older. Honoria fell. Mark that, the last line she kept for herself. My niece was never rescued, whatever the papers sang. She was recognized. There is all the difference in the world, and most rooms never learn it. And in the evenings, when the house had gone quiet and their small daughter was asleep upstairs with her fists thrown up over her head in unearned victory, the Duke would sometimes stand before the mantel with a candle, reading 10 lines he knew by heart, and his wife would come and stand within the circle of his arm, and neither said anything at all, because a promise of company, kept, requires no further conversation. If you have ever sat at the edge of a bright room and believed yourself invisible, if you have ever been valued at the sum of what you lost, rather than the whole of what you are, this story was for you, and you were never once invisible to the one who keeps the truer ledger. Stay a while by our fire if you will. Tell us in the comments which city you are listening from, and whether anyone ever saw your worth when the room would not. We read every one. And if these candlelit tales bring you any comfort, do subscribe to The Hearth, so you will not miss the next story. I shall keep the candles lit for you. Sleep well now, and be gentle with yourself.